Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Matt Pratt Hyatt from the Mold Pros. So today we are going to, I'm introducing Dr. Jill Crista, who is a great colleague and great practitioner. I think I got to know her probably about 6 years ago in an ILADS talk where she was talking about mycotoxin testing, and I was like, oh, well, I know a couple things about mycotoxin testing. So I'm gonna listen to this person talk. And not only did she talk great about how what the new things were about mycotoxin testing, she really had some great insights into how to treat mold toxicity and mycotoxin toxicity, which is really something I was I knew how to test for mycotoxins, but I didn't really understand the treatment aspects of it. And I think we're still learning a lot of the things right now, even today. So, because it's still a work in progress. But we wanted to invite Dr. Crista today to give her insights in this, because I think that she's really one of the lead cutting edge people in this. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Crista. I really appreciate you having you on.
Thank you, Dr. Pratt Hyatt. I am so happy to be here. Yeah, thanks. I'd love to share this approach. And what I love about it is that it's just an approach. So I'm hoping that for those people who it resonates with, or those who have a patient that need this kind of approach because they're not doing so well with another approach, or you're just starting with mold, hopefully that this will give you an approach to get them better. I call it to break the mold. So let's get started. Here's what we're going to cover. I'm going to expand the definition of mold-related illness. Hopefully, I will convince you of that. Review the mechanisms, some symptoms, offer you my clinical questionnaire, discuss different ways to assess, so testing, introduce my therapeutic order, learn some dietary and supplement tips. I want you to appreciate the role of bile. I cannot wait to tell you about bile. Covers some of the, I'm just picking and choosing a few of the key natural therapies that protect and repair from mycotoxin damage, which is a piece of all of this. And then make the case for systemic and intranasal targeted antifungal treatment. So mold is far more than what I call spore illness. If you look at the CDC's website, their definition of mold illness pretty much sticks around on the things that have to do with interaction with spores. And we're pretty familiar with these. These are IgE-based reactions and actually non-IgE-based reactions that cause things like allergic rhinitis. It can cause postnasal drip, sore throat, asthma, hypersensitivity, pneumonitis, and then the non-IgE mediated asthma exacerbations. And so that's over here in spore. And then you go all the way over to the endpoint of infection. And that's when we can get invasive aspergillosis, typically of the lungs. That's what you're going to see on the CDC website. And mold illness is so much more than that. We also see mast cell, increased recruitment, increased degranulation, which means more histamine, and enhanced survival. Mold actually induces the mast cells to stick around longer so they have more degranulation. There's also mold fragments. This creates a condition I refer to as mold mesothelioma. We're going to go into each of these, so don't worry if you're like, whoa, there's so much information. Other mold dangers are mycotoxins. So mycotoxins are they're a purposeful poison that mold will make to compete out any other microbe. So we are very familiar with a mycotoxin called penicillin. This is from the Penicillium mold, where it is trying to defend its territory against other molds, but also against bacteria, because we see that in a water damaged building, as you see at the bottom there, we see increased microbial diversity, and among that, some quorum sensing and quorum behavior. So mycotoxins, they are made purposefully, the intention behind them is purposely being made to compete out other critters. So that could be any microbe of any kind. Mold also makes chemicals. So happily living, metabolizing mold, I call it mold farts because that's funny. And I learned from Dr. Pratt Hyatt about MPA that is not a mycotoxin. So it's not purposefully made to defend. It is something that is just secreted from happily living metabolizing mold. So our VOCs or microbial VOCs, aldehydes, alcohols. So these are the chemical load that can make people chemically sensitive. So look at that list. We're missing so much when we talk about mold. So this is a little diagram I made for myself when I was first learning about mold, just to understand how deep do each of the factors that how mold can make you sick, how deep do they go into the lungs, so to speak? So if you look on the left-hand side, we have the respiratory system, and on the right-hand side, mold. And if you look at where we start to lose mucociliary clearance, so the 1 to 2 micron in the terminal bronchi, now look over to the mold side. We see we have spores. The smallest one is going to be a 1 micron. That's a really small penicillium spore. Fragments are 1 to 2 microns. So what we see, as the diagram shows, is the spores can go in and they get trapped in that clearance system, and the little fingers, the brush border brings it back up, and we cough them out. They cause an inflammatory reaction locally, but they don't typically stick around. Fragments, however, are like little asbestos. They're highly inflammatory, and they can get into the lung tissue down at that beyond where we have the clearance system, and that's how they can cause perpetual inflammation, irritation. Mycotoxins are 0.1 microns in size. They go right down to the alveoli and right into the blood system. So spores, the immune responses are highly variable. You're gonna have somebody who has kind of no reaction to an allergic reaction to that invasive fungal infection. My general rule of thumb, this is just me, observation, is that spores tend to induce reactions and mycotoxins tend to suppress reactions. And they both will deplete with ongoing exposure, and they both can cause inflammation, irritation. The mechanistic steps of how the spores invade a body is they induce that inflammatory reaction, then they actually change the mucosal tissue to reduce mucosal clearance. So smart. Mold is it's like a stealth Navy SEAL. And then what it does is it adheres. We see adhesion, then evasion. So it's like, whoop, I'm not here. Nothing to see here, because it will coat itself and change how our body reacts to it. And then invasion. And I want you to pay particular attention to that evasion to invasion step. So we see with spore exposure, inflammation, irritation, and degradation of the mucosal linings over time. That's the respiratory passage. And if they're getting it, through digestion as well, that's going to be the digestive system. And then, of course, we get spore invasion or infection if there's long-term exposure, and that has caused immune depletion. What about spores and mast cells? Mast cells are being talked about a whole lot lately. And I love this quote from the study I referenced at the bottom. For their strategic location at vascularized mucosal surfaces, combined with like this amazing versatility, mast cells are well positioned to respond to fungi and or fungal allergens. So in other words, it's saying of the things that can induce mast cells, or of the things that, let me flip that respond to fungi, mast cells are particularly adept and get recruited. So what we see is that spores will induce innate immune responses against fungal infections by a couple different mechanisms, and not all are really beneficial. So we're going to see inflammation typically. So we can see that it will kill the granulation will kill the fungi, but it's also going to be creating a ton of inflammation. Actively living mold, we see influences mast cell homeostasis to enhance its survival. So they want to keep it around longer. We talked about in the last couple slides. And we can see IgE allergic responses that have nothing to do with the mold allergen itself. It's almost like it turns up the entire IgE reactivity. And so it doesn't have to be antigen specific. And so that's how we can see people end up also, they had a mold exposure that started it, and now they're reacting to their pet, and they never had a problem with their pet. Now they're reacting to car exhaust. They had never had a problem with car exhaust. They're reacting to pollen or dust mites or something like that. The grasses, the tree pollen, and they didn't ever have a problem with that. When I have somebody who has lived 34 years and has not been sensitive to pollen, and they have a possible water damage building exposure, I don't look at the pollen, I go looking for mold. So empirically, my experience is that we see increased recruitment of mast cells at that stage of evasion to invasion. So when I have someone with a lot of mast cell issues, we go for the antifungals as soon as possible. How about spore fragments? They're made 500 to 1 fragment to spore. So one spore can break off into all of these little bits and pieces. This will usually occur when dead or dried mold gets disrupted, and it becomes ultrafine particulate that can be permanently suspended in the air and in our lungs, which is crazy to think about. They are highly inflammatory to the sinus and lung tissue and tend to be more inflammatory than the spores themselves. And again, you can kind of understand now, we understand because they can get farther past our clearance system, then they can hang out there. So that's very inflammatory. We will see airway remodeling if someone has a persistent fragment exposure, and it can cause that mold mesothelioma, which, like a mesothelial condition, same picture as mesothelioma without any asbestos exposure. So the mycotoxins, so we did spores, spore fragments, we did spores and mast cells. Now we're on to mycotoxins. I'm not going to really cover the chemicals because you kind of understand what that is. That's a chemical load. Here are the mycotoxins we can test for at this time and the molds they come from. These are the typical ones you're going to see in a water damage building exposure, a CPAP exposure, HVAC system exposure, car, baby bath toy, and some food. So there's no test on this, but this is a nice little slide for you for reference. And here they are in their shapes. Take a look at that. Just even a non-biochemically trained person can look at that and say, wow, those are really different shapes. They are. They're very, very different. So each mycotoxin that a person is exposed to has its own special sauce that it is affecting the body with. But we do have some commonalities among all of them. This is actually a HVAC duct from an occupational exposure from one of my patients. Doesn't that look lovely? There's some serious fusarium in there, sprinkled with a little aspergillus. So mycotoxins are secreted by all fungal elements of the spore, including the fragments. If the fragment before it broke off had mycotoxins in it, they will transfer onto the substrate. All mycotoxins vary, kind of got that. But the one thing I want you to take away, if you remember nothing from tonight, please remember these are lipophilic, which means fat soluble or oil soluble. Why that matters is both how it gets into the body. So that means it doesn't have to have a transporter protein to bring them in. It can just by osmosis into the cell. And there's a gradation or gradient that happens where if you're breathing it in over and over again, or if you're colonized and you're making them, they will just move down the gradient deeper and deeper into tissue. And that's how we can see mycotoxins actually come into the brainstem. So lipophilic, super important. Second piece about lipophilic is not only that they can get in through osmosis, basically, and I'm sorry, I'll use scientists if I'm using the wrong term, probably adsorption is a better thing I should say, and they bioaccumulate. So it isn't like vitamin C. If you take too much vitamin C, you pee it out. If you get too much mycotoxin, you store it. That's really important. They are energetically expensive to the mold to make. So where there is mold, there isn't always mycotoxins, that there always is MPA because it's metabolizing, if it's a metabolizing mold. We see that they all interfere with vital cellular processes. They are harmful to human health. They can be inhaled, ingested, and absorbed through the skin. And the reason I mentioned baby bath toys is that was the reason for a couple of my patients. They were all in the same family. They had moldy bath toys, and I was going through their skin. Mycotoxins are also commodified for weapons and medicine. We have a lot of cancer therapies that are mycotoxins. Here are the commonalities of all of them. They're immunotoxic, neurotoxic. They're toxic to the entire alimentary tract. Dermatoxic, nephrotoxic, hepatotoxic, so that's kidneys and liver, of course, organs of detoxification, hepatocarcinogenic, genotoxic, teratogenic, and carcinogenic. No bueno. The health impacts of mycotoxins are that they are highly inflammatory to respiratory tissues. So now you have spores are inflammatory, fragments are even more inflammatory, and then let's add a little inflammation on top of that with mycotoxins. They have the effect to reduce the cellular clearance. So they impact the neurological system of that moving the foreign particle out. Some of them do cross the the BBB, which I apparently need to firm up, and they will reduce its integrity. They do it both locally but also by causing a lot of changes to the gut lining. So if you have a leaky gut, leaky brain. Inhalation, they ride the olfactory nerve to the hippocampus and the frontal lobe. And I had a patient who had a 12-year exposure to black mold, who had a melanoma diagnosis. He ended up having metastasis to the brain, and it was in exactly those two places. Many cross the placenta and bioactivate in utero. So the most strict person I am strict with is pregnant mamas. They are also found in breast milk, and they're implicated in neuropsych problems such as PANS, and as well the pathogenesis and male prevalence of autism. They're implicated. They induce apoptosis of the intestinal epithelium. So that's how we end up with leaky gut and then leaky brain. They induce bladder wall irritation and ulcerations. You can see an interstitial cystitis type picture. They're modified by multiple enzymes. We see cytochrome P450s, glutathione transferase, UDP, I never can say that word, and sulfur transferases. So you can see lots of different mechanisms. And did I have glucuronidation? I did not have that on there. They deplete cellular glutathione. So glutathione is depleted not just in the liver. So if a mycotoxin is taking that path, that's important, but they deplete glutathione in the mitochondria and in the cell, and thus cause mitochondrial damage and more oxidation with NRF2 depletion. They interfere with protein synthesis, and that's really, if you stop to think about that, what does that mean? That means DNA, RNA synthesis. So they disrupt that. That means actin and myosins. That's our muscle and our skeletal or our cardiac muscle. Keratin and elastin, skin, hair, nails. Enzymes. That means enzymes like nagalase that are in charge of some of your immune system. Immune globulins, which help fight off fungal infection. Hemoglobin, which carries heme, any heme-based enzyme as well, such as cytochrome P450. Albumin and carrier proteins. That's huge. That is a way to really whack a body, is to disrupt all of those systems by impeding that synthesis of the protein. They inhibit host defense by reducing antibody-producing cells, antibody titers and blood serum, so they can disrupt your infection labs, and they reduce phagocytosis, so the cleaning crew, and that's how you can get increased carcinogenesis. We see on a CBC a relative lymphopenia with a neutrophilia, and especially in cases of spore exposure, eosinophilia. So what about MPA? I said I wasn't going to talk about it. I forgot I put this in here. It's not a mycotoxin, but it is quickly absorbed and excreted in bile within the first few hours of exposure. So what I do with my patients then, when we have a very high MPA, is we use frequent small dosing of insoluble fiber to bind and their detoxification support to protect their organs. This is a potent immunosuppressant, so much so that we have a drug. They made a drug out of it. And that is for organ rejection. So the body can't reject foreign substances. Think about that. Can't reject foreign substances like fungi. Yeah. Okay. So they also cause intestinal lining damage. MPA really wrecks the gut and also is detoxified by the glucuronidation. So I really focus on glucuronidation with this one. Typically it's something that clears pretty fast if you're addressing it. Things like green tea, resveratrol, and turmeric. So will you agree with me that we need a new definition of mold-related illness? In my opinion, we need spore symptoms, spore fragments, the chemicals, and the mycotoxins. That's the true picture of mold-related illness. I'm giving you a little hint on what's really good for mold in the nose. All right, so what explains the symptom persistence? We see in occupational studies, there's a coin flip. Half of the people that get out of that exposure are fine. Half of the people stay sick. They still have symptoms even though they got out of that exposure. And this is done over these studies. The particular one I'm talking about was done over 7 years. They did 4 remediations in this building. And why do they stay symptomatic? And what they found is if the person stayed symptomatic out of the building over the weekend and they were still symptomatic Monday morning, they were more predicted to be the person who wasn't going to be better when they left the building or remediated. There was also a chronic fatigue study that showed that it isn't the mere presence of fungus in our sinuses. We all have it there. So what they found is in the normal controls, they had fungus in their sinuses. In the sick people, they have fungus in their sinus. So it isn't that there's fungus there. The interesting thing is the normal healthy people didn't have mycotoxins in their sinuses. The sick people did. So I believe that it's that water damage exposure is the trigger. That's the key. You're basically breathing in biofilm, off-gassing and messages that tells your own flora something's trying to move in. And so it starts to get depleted and it gets reactive. And then you become the sick building. And the real thing that I talk about in my book a lot is mycotoxins. There are other things there. There's endotoxins and there's metabolic die-off of metabolic products of the actomycetes. The reason that I put a lot of emphasis on mycotoxins is the intention. Intention is everything. Because mold wants to compost you. It really does. When I speak to the Lyme treating community, and they ask, well, which one should we treat first? Let's take the 10,000 foot view. Lyme needs you alive. Mold would rather compost you. Then it's doing its job better of composting and taking previously living organic material and making it into fine nutrients so that some other living thing can take it. So with mold and Lyme, we definitely address the mold and the Lyme or then the Lyme. But yeah, so this explains colonization. I hope I'm explaining it. It's the idea of a continuum. So if you're susceptible, you've had a sufficient exposure, or maybe you were exposed to just the big uglies, those mycotoxins trigger that protective mechanism. And over time, your healthy microbiome becomes pathogenic biofilm. That's how also somebody who's doing pretty well with treatment, and then they go stay in a hotel for a night, and then they're whacked for 2 weeks. It's because they still have some colonization there that just got triggered again. And that's why I use antifungals. And I'm very lucky I can do that because I'm a naturopathic doctor and I have plants. So I don't have to wait till somebody has a frank fungal infection and they're really bad off to warrant using a drug that has some side effects and some safety issues. I can use plants and get on it sooner. So I just gave you this symptom list. I'm not going to go through them, but I just wanted you to really, the big picture is there's 2 slides. The big picture is all of the systems that mold is impacting. I gave you just the top, in the beginning, the things that are most common and most common with other symptoms or other conditions as well. So it's not diagnostic for mold. Mold is really a picture, the symptom picture or the totality, not so much like, ooh, that symptom equals mold. I will tell you though, anxiety, urinary frequency, fatigue, vision problems, pelvic pain, tinnitus. Those are all kind of like, we're getting a little closer. If you see that confluence of symptoms, then it's getting closer to a mold diagnosis for me. So look at this: respiratory, digestive, immune, neurological, cutaneous problems, vascular, detoxification, urological, endocrine, from one thing. That's why it's really hard to find. So I created a clinical questionnaire. You guys are very welcome to use it in your clinic. I'm working hard to get this scientifically validated. So I'm looking for anybody who's willing to fill out a questionnaire the morning they do their mycotoxin test so that we can correlate to see if this actually has value. I put it into 3 categories, and I want to just say thank you to Dr. Horowitz for his MSIDS Lyme questionnaire and the guidance to try to put numbers. I'm a very quantifiable person or quantitative person. So category 1 is things that we see with lots of other conditions, and they're not specific to mold, but they're common. And then we can see category 2 gets a little more mold specific, a little more serious, and category 3 gets quite mold specific and a little higher on the serious scale. And then what you do is you give yourself a total mold risk result. You add the categories and then see what your total mold risk is, which would be not likely mold, possible mold, and probable mold or biotoxin sickness. So you are welcome. If you want to email me at support@drcrista.com or go to my website on the courses page, there's a little under the doctor course that I teach, you can put your email in and get the questionnaire to use in practice. Getting the hint yet? What's good for mold? Mold assessments. So how do you test for mold sickness? This is a big question, and one that we're really working on. Whenever there's a burgeoning diagnosis, we work on it and we learn the whole time. We hope we're learning all the time. So the decision points, if you're trying to figure out how to test for mold, is it more information even required to guide your treatment? If you already know the person is exposed to a water damaged building, go forth and treat. Sometimes you're trying to establish a baseline or get the patient, their family buy-in. That's often the problem, is that because there's genetic susceptibility differences, there could be like the one person in the family that's super sick and they're the mold canary, and everybody else is kind of doing okay and they think they're a little bit crazy. Sometimes you're looking for something like proof to show a landlord or the building owner of where you work. This is a little harder because there are really well-paid lawyers that are trying to discredit mold as a real thing, especially mycotoxin illness. They're trying to say, oh no, they're eating it. That's not, sometimes you're comfortable with an existing model, like you like blood antibody testing. And so you want to use that kind of testing. Maybe you have a certain test that you think is more accurate. Maybe you're dealing with cost issues, no Medicare coverage, that kind of thing. And maybe you want to reassess treatment progress. So these are all the thought processes of which way to test and whether to test, I guess, and when. So I just gave you my first tier lab test that I go through. I just want to point out that on the physical exam, you may see fungal findings, but not necessary. So you don't necessarily have to have jock itch or vaginitis or something like that to say, yes, this is a mold thing. You can have absolutely no mold symptoms, fungal symptoms on the outside and still be mold sick. So direct tests would be the liquid chromatography, mass spectrometry, urine mycotoxin test. The other urine mycotoxin test is, oops, I forgot to change that. That's an ELISA test. Sorry, Matt. We have changed that slide. So you can do urine mycotoxin testing 2 different ways. You can do serum mycotoxin testing. You can use a stool test. That's a direct test if you're seeing candida overgrowth and things like that on a stool test. A neuroquant shows the brain changes that can happen with mycotoxin and mold exposure. You can also look at signs on a white blood cell count, a CBC, checking their vitamin D, checking their liver function. Liver enzymes do go up with mycotoxin exposure. An IgG or an IgE for mold. That's not useful for mycotoxins, but if they have an allergy to mold, to the spores. And then a natural killer cell function test is specific to the particular immune dysregulation and depletion that mold causes. You can also run an MMP9 that will be in sort of a surrogate for a mast cell issue, and an organic acids urine test. So that's all the ways that I might consider a first run. And another thing I want to share with you is I have a urine mycotoxin prep sheet that I give to my patients before they do a urine mycotoxin test. 3 days before the test, there's a food list that they need to avoid, because there's typically in the studies, it looks like there's a 48-hour washout period for mycotoxins that you've ingested. So I have them avoid ingesting those so that when we see a positive mycotoxin on a lab, we know it's not from food. So we've taken that potential limitation out. Consider sauna before the night before. However, I will show you on the next slide, that could be a confounding factor as well. The thing we don't have worked out yet is what is the peak and what is the trough. If you have done a detox and that's the night before and the person went pee before they went to bed, did you actually lose the biggest catch of mycotoxins? And we're still working all of that out. So typically what I do with my, I also have a which tests for which patient situation, through different experiments that I'm running on my own. I'm trying to figure out what are the things and what's the timing. And I can tell you, and I've done a lot of these, I can tell you full-heartedly, we don't know. So be careful of anybody that's really religious about this is the way you must provoke or you must not. All of these things, we just really don't know. So you know your patient, you know if they're a super toxic person and might need a little push. If they're not super toxic, I've had plenty of people be positive when it was positive and it showed up. So just be aware too that they may be in mold, but it might be too short for them to actually be storing and dumping, or dumping. They might be storing, they might be in accumulation mode, and their exposure might be their intimate partner. Kind of creepy. Buzz. Guess what's good for mold? Okay, so here's the treatment. This is the approach that I take. As a naturopathic doctor, I was trained, number 3, the first 3 things we do with any toxic illness: avoidance, number 1, number 2, avoidance, number 3, avoidance. So yeah, that was my teacher, Dr. Walter Kernian, really nailing it in for me, how important it is If you're pounding your finger with a nail or with a hammer, there's only so much ibuprofen you can take. That's not solving the problem. You got to stop doing that. So you have to get the person away from that mold exposure, remediate their space, give them a holiday, get them out of their space as much as possible, have their insurance pay for them to go to a hotel, those kinds of things, because avoidance is the number one thing. It's just like peeling an orange. You wouldn't eat an orange like we do an apple. You peel off that outer layer and you've already unburdened the body. And as we saw in the occupational exposures, that alone cures 50% of the people. They do not get all the way better if they're not away from the mold. The next thing is fundamentals. We'll talk about what that means. And so you peel both of those layers completely, and then you pick and choose the little things in the middle. So what section does your patient need for their exposure? So that's where protect and repair, that's from spore and mycotoxin damage. And then fight, meaning fight back that fungal burden to get the microbiome back to balance. Avoidance, though, is the hardest part. It is the hardest part. These patients are the most resistant out of all of the environmental medicine patients that I work with. And we're talking lead, cadmium, tungsten combination, heavy metal. Those people are very resistant to treatment, meaning their bodies have a hard time getting rid of that, but they're not resistant to the concept that that's what's causing their illness. Mold people are extremely resistant, and they will convince you it's not a problem. That's why I like to use an indoor environmental professional on board to have another expert, because I'm a body expert, I'm not a building expert, that they can come in and really assess the building. Fundamentals, it's good, clean living. In naturopathic medicine, we call these the basic treatment guidelines. Get your rhythm on with the circadian rhythm, wake up with the sun, go to bed at night with the sun as much as possible. So good sleep-wake cycles, hydration with the right kind of hydration. Mold sick people have a change in their ADH, which means antidiuretic hormone, and they need water that's full of salts and solutes to hold the water into their system. So things like spring water, well water, or if you have RO, adding things like salt and electrolytes. Get your digestion moving, those emunctories, which means the ways we excrete waste in our body, sweating, pooping, peeing, breathing, all of those things need to be opened up because we're about to push toxin. Get movement on board. No matter how affected you are, you can still move your body. Community, spiritual practice, I personally think is very important, or energetic practice, and then a healthy diet. Well, what does that mean for mold? So here are the things out of my book. I just wanted to share with you the things that I have tiers. So I do testing by tiers, like this, the first round. If we don't get our answer, we go to the second round. Same thing with food. First tier, second tier. So most people, when they give up the first tier, and this is a therapeutic diet, which means we're just doing it in the beginning stages of mold treatment to unburden their body from fungal burden. Remember the intention in the toxin. It is, I'm coming to get you. I'm coming to kill you, microbe, and I want to take over because I'm secreting this toxin to defend my space. So why would we eat more fungus? That's just going to reinforce the message. So the three categories of things that are on this list as you're reading, they either are fungus, like mushrooms, or they tend to encourage fungal overgrowth, like fermented foods, and leavened bread. So fungus would be yeast, or they encourage fungal overgrowth because they're a carb. Fungus loves sugar, just like candida. So what not to eat or drink. This is the second tier where we go a little more. Oh, and I forgot, there's also things on the first tier that tend to be mycotoxin contaminated, like corn and potatoes. Second tier gets a little farther, a little more restrictive. I don't like to have to go to this tier, but I just wanted people to know about it because most people, when they give up the first tier stuff, they're like, wow, I had no idea I was reacting to that because I eat it every day. And the beverages, no alcohol, no kombucha, no fermented cider. Oh, sad. No fermented tea, no sweets, because that's going to feed fungus. So you get the idea. I don't like to be the no-no girl. I also like to tell you what to do. So here are things that you can eat to protect you from mold. And this is going to be on this list are things, and the reason why is on there. I didn't put a reason on the essential fat, so I just want to explain that. If you have a fat-soluble toxin and you're trying to get rid of a toxin, here's another Dr. Kernianism. The solution to pollution is dilution. So if you're trying to dilute a fat soluble toxin, you have to have copious, clean, correct fats that will give your body. I heard a speaker, and I hope that I'm blanking on her name, but she said, give it an oil change, give your body an oil change. We want to put the good oil in and get the oil out. And so all the other things on the list, you can see why they're on the list there. There's also things that fight mold that we eat every day. Garlic and onions. That family kills mold. It keeps fungus in check, does lots of other things too. And also we have spices we eat every day that we forget how powerful they are. There is a reason why they are in our diet. There is a reason why they taste good to us, because we need them. We need that help. So we've done avoidance, fundamentals. Now let's talk about protect and repair. The essence of protect and repair is basically the dilution. So using those clean, correct fats, typically we're going to have to supplement that to get enough to do the full oil change. Restoration of fat soluble nutrients, because again, those mycotoxins butt out things that we need, like vitamin D. It blocks vitamin D receptors, like vitamin A, like CoQ10, like essential fatty acids. So let's try and get those back in. Vitamin E, how could I forget? Vitamin E, so important for detoxification, antioxidant. I use excessive amounts of bioflavonoids. Bioflavonoids are the colorful part of fruits and vegetables. In animal studies, they will use bioflavonoids before they use binders. So for me, this is a very, very important part of treatment. We want to support systems of detoxification of those mycotoxins, restore the immune depletion, and choose treatments with multiple desired mechanisms like plant medicine, because these guys get pill fatigue. There's only so many things we can ask your body to do. Bile is one very important part of protecting and repairing. We use bile to detoxify mycotoxins. So the bile comes in, we breathe it in. We saw the diagram, it goes right down to the base of the lungs. It's picked up by the blood system. The blood carries it to the liver. Half of it also goes to the kidneys and we pee them out. The other half goes to the liver, and the liver packages it up in bile. And then the bile gets spit into our intestines to hopefully be pooped out. The problem is we also use bile to save our fat soluble nutrients. So our body's super effective at recycling that bile. So we want to put in things that will trap the bile, and it forces it to poop it out, basically. So that's why we have binders. You probably hear about binders with mold toxicity, but I'll just reinforce bioflavonoids before binders. So bile is sequestered by the binders so that you poop it out instead of reabsorb it. The reabsorption then, or the blocking of the reabsorption, can put you into a nutrient depletion of the good fat soluble vitamins that we need, that the whole recycle process was made for. It's really important to know that bile binding is like two magnets. It's not like Velcro. So if you're constipated, there it goes. And that mycotoxin can now do the intestinal epithelial damage that it does so well. So these are just some of the things that I see, the long-term binder use, the particular nutrients that I see depleted, that often we will need to supplement to get somebody back on track if they've been on binders too long. I like pre-binders. We have to make sure you're even making bile in the first place. Do you know how many people have such gummy bile? It's no mystery to me that, guess what's a good bitter? Coffee. Coffee is a really good bitter. It's no mystery to me that as our world got more toxic, we added things like endocrine disruptors, fat soluble toxins, BPA, plastic bottles, that kind of thing. We started craving more and more and more coffee. It's interesting, isn't it? We're doing our own remedies. So before you go to grab a binder, you have to make sure you actually made bile in the first place. And the things that taste bitter on our tongue are the things that do that. Look at all the things that cholagogues will do. That's the term for things that make bile. We can see that it stimulates bile secretion and flow, but also the immune system of the gut, the secretory IgA, helps probiotics adhere to our mucosal lining, triggers lipase secretion, which lipase itself can degrade mycotoxins, protects against that intestinal barrier breakdown by promoting the next cell to come up. It's like the soldiers line up, and bile acids and bitter will encourage it to come up and replace so that there's no hole in the wall. And things that taste bitter induce peristalsis. So they disrupt that paralyzation that mycotoxins do to the intestinal lining. So my first step binders is fiber. Insoluble fiber is shown to be one of the best binders of bile. So what we're binding with mold toxicity that's been breathed in is bile. And I've had best success with blends, but I put it in order here of the least to most constipating for my patient base. And then how I start with just 1/8 of a teaspoon. And if anybody is constipated, nope, we stop. No binders if you're bound up, because we don't want to cause more problem than by trying to make you better. And I typically tend to avoid Saccharomyces boulardii because while it was shown in animal studies that it is effective, those animals are on a fixed diet determined by someone else. My animals that I work with, the humans, they don't stick to a sugar-free, carb-free diet very well. So Saccharomyces has caused my patients to be more carb cravers. What about botanical binders? So you can also use steamed kale. Steamed kale was shown to be about 35% effective as cholestyramine, the drug. Oh, so cool. And you can be nourishing your body because it's very high in vitamin C and vitamin A. Aloe has also been shown to bind aflatoxin, and I really love this one for people who have a lot of gut problems because it's also extremely soothing to the gut lining. So people with reflux, burning, if they go to the bathroom and they have kind of burning around their bottom afterwards, aloe is a wonderful plant for that. So I just wanted to show you that one. This is how I use it. I use it as a juice. If you have constipation problems, you use the whole leaf because it's the outer part of the leaf that has a laxative effect. If you have too frequent of bowels, then avoid the outer leaf. The other cool thing about aloe is it boosts the humoral immunity that mold mycotoxins deplete. So cool. Vitamin D is part of the immune restoration part of the protect and repair. And I just wanted to point this out. I mentioned it before, but we do see that vitamin D receptors are significantly down modulated with aflatoxin exposure. And if you go back to that first chart that shows the chemical structure of all of them, anything that is similar to aflatoxin also is doing that. So I typically dose my patients to a blood value of 60 to 90 nanograms per milliliter. And we test every couple of months just to make sure we're not going too far. Most of my patients will have a low vitamin D if they have a mold exposure. What about bioflavonoids? So one of the most powerful bioflavonoids is a polyphenol from green tea. Green tea is a miracle plant. I see why we had wars over it. It's not only detoxifying, so an antitoxin, it's also an antifungal. So that could be your first antifungal that you start taking is green tea every day. It's an antibacterial and antiviral. It protects against the cell injury that mycotoxins can do. These are cytotoxic, meaning cellular injury. And so it protects that and also is cellular protective to the immune system of that is particularly hit hard. The ones that chew up and eat, we saw reduced phagocytosis. Those are the macrophages. So green tea will help protect those. So if patient is, a little too caffeine sensitive, we can use the decaf capsules. Just one caution, they do inhibit, green tea does inhibit cytochrome P450. So if you're on a medication that also uses that pathway, talk with your doctor about dosing adjustment. Another detox one that I love is milk thistle. It strengthens and stabilizes cell membranes and it blocks mycotoxins from hurting the liver. So amazing. It's protecting from the inflammation and free radical oxidation. We can see also the fats, we're trying to do an oil change. If they are oxidized, they become more gooey. And so milk thistle will keep those fats into a fluid, mobile, movable, flowing type of a fat. We also see, I never knew this when I graduated from medical school, that milk thistle can stimulate new liver cells. I was told when I graduated that just once your liver is damaged, it's done. Nothing can regenerate. Not true. We can regenerate liver cells. We can regenerate brain. And milk thistle is one of those things that really helps with the liver. So this one also protects the genes that will keep you not becoming that genetic mold canary. This one does have a minimum therapeutic dose of 700 milligrams a day. I typically divide that with my patients. It's another one that inhibits cytochrome P450. And what's interesting is that's a heme-based enzyme. We talked about protein synthesis inhibition. So it is already impaired by mold. So we want to, I think what the body is doing is trying to slow the roll on making that enzyme so it can catch up a little bit. Turmeric is another one that is a lovely detoxifier for mold. You see it's antioxidant, protective to the kidneys, to the liver, and the epigenetic protection. So we have milk thistle helping the genes. Turmeric is helping the expression of those genes because of the soup it's swimming in. This one can cause people to hurt. So I really start slow with turmeric and go and proceed carefully. It will increase the availability of glutathione, as will milk thistle. So the two of them is really a nice way to boost that glutathione without having to take glutathione. It also inhibits cytochrome P450, so check for dose adjustments. Our last step is fight. And I'm sorry, I'm going a little over, Matt. I have so much to say. So I use systemic, meaning whole body, and intranasal antifungals. I have found that I didn't used to use the intranasals, but I found when I added that, it was after Dr. Brewer's study where they showed the fungus in the sinuses of healthy people and sick people, and then that there are mycotoxins with the sick people. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm missing the top of the tube. Our sinuses are the top of our digestive system and the top of our respiratory system. So here I was treating the body and the gut, and then missed our first interface with mold, which is right there in our sinuses. I can tell you from my experience, I had been working with Lyme patients and mold patients. When I started adding the intranasals, it was just like, zoop, people just got better so much faster. I've also noticed that if you use the two together, it does reduce fungal resistance issues. And of course, what you use, how strong your antifungals are, and those kind of things, that's going to really be dependent on your patient. What I love is that the botanical medicines, though, they're effective, but they're also safe. And you don't have to wait for a patient to be uber sick to say, okay, now it's worth the side effect. And I often will combine, if I have to use a pharmaceutical, I never do it without a plant, such as garlic. Garlic is really good at reducing fungal resistance. So here are a couple antifungals that I love. Holy basil is wonderful. It's very gentle, so it's great for kids and people who are really, really sensitive. It's also good for people who have mood issues. So if mold has really hit your mood, it really lifts the mind. It just like brightens the mind. It's antifungal, antibiotic, antioxidant, and an antiparasitic. So if you have that part also swimming in here, which a lot of people who've had long-standing mold exposure, especially mycotoxins, end up with parasites. We eat parasites all the time, but usually our stomach acid degrades them and kills them before they can actually set up shop. Well, if you don't have all the immune system to take care of that, some of them can set up shop. What I like about this one is it significantly inhibits the activities of MMP9, which has been linked to mast cell activation. So if you have somebody who also has a lot of histamine issues, this one can help settle things down. And it has action against fluconazole resistance. Fluconazole has many, 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 many fungi that have become resistant to it because we're using it in paint, we're using it in agriculture, we're overusing it, kind of like with antibiotics. And we're using it not in an appropriate way. So this is one where you can use ahead of time and then use the fluconazole if you know you want to use that for your patient, and it helps reduce resistance. Garlic, I just mentioned, this is an amazing plant. If I know it's on the FODMAP's diet, but if you just find a product that has the alicillin in it, or the alliin, that's going to be just the aspect, the sulfur containing aspect, and not the part that sets off the fructans, that sets off the FODMAP reaction. So I tend to use this one in a tincture form. Most of the studies that I have there also have it in a tincture form. It's antifungal against mold, not just candida. A lot of these people say, oh, that's just an antifungal for yeast. This one is actually against Aspergillus and Penicillium species. So it's great for colonization. You can spray garlic in your nose. And it's amazing also for candida and candida resistance. It's also an antimicrobial. So against Staph aureus, E. coli, Pseudomonas, which is one of those hard to get at sinus buggers, and bacillus. So these are all of the things that garlic also does. It's protective to the GI system. It's an anti-diabetic. It protects the cardiovascular system. It's an immune modulator. It is a miracle food. Not only keeps the Draculas, the vampires away, but keeps the mold away too. So any caution with this one is gastritis. It's, garlic can be really hard on the gut. So sometimes your patient might need to take it in a pill form to get it in. Thyme is one of my go-tos. It's Old Faithful. It's an antifungal, but also very broad spectrum antimicrobial, antibacterial, reduces fungal resistance to fluconazole, and as well to, do I have it on here? Oh, okay. Also to itraconazole. It has inhibitory aspects. So one of the things that we see is that mold gets mean. When it knows you're coming after it, it will start to kick up its production of mycotoxins and make more. Thyme is one that shuts that down. So a lot of times I will start with thyme and as my kind of first sneaking in there so that the fungus doesn't have that increased mycotoxin effect. It combines really well with other antifungals because it has a very, very high safety profile. You can take 2 times what you need to kill the fungus and it is still non-toxic. I also have a steam inhalation video on YouTube. It's really nice for coronavirus type reactions. It's for fungal colonization, just cleans things up. So if you're really stuffy at night, so allergic reactions, you're real stuffy and you can't get to sleep, you can do a thyme steam inhalation. So that's out on YouTube. And here are some intranasal options. So those were systemic ones. Garlic also can be used intranasally. And then here are some other ones. I love essential oils. They do have a lot of aldehydes. So if you're sensitive to aldehydes, it's not the remedy for you. But you can find pre-made essential oil combinations. Some people just take essential oils and use like Young Living Thieves and then swab that. There are lots of different ways that you can treat the sinuses, but these are just some ideas. And I do have a video on YouTube also about how to make your own DIY mold killing essential oil nasal spray. So with mold, beware of misplaced optimism. Your patients will convince you mold's not a problem. No, oh, we remediated. We took care of that. No, I'm not sensitive to mold. There's going to be all kinds of things. My husband's not sick, so I must be fine. I'm a very optimistic person, but mold has taught me that being the most pessimistic and the most worst case scenario and taking all precautions actually benefits you the most when it comes to mold. So I want to tell you about some helpful resources I have for your patients that makes your job easier. I have my book, Break the Mold, that's available on Amazon, big box stores, libraries, those kind of places. It is in different languages now. It's in Greek, Chinese, and Polish, and German is coming soon. So you have someone who's not an English speaker and happens to speak any of those. I also have a new course that I just launched called 9 Things to Know While You're Still in Mold. A lot of people feel stuck. They are terrified and they just get paralyzed by feeling like there's nothing they can do. They're just, if you're in a situation where it's your job or you're in a rental, is it worth doing something? Yes. Yes. I can tell you 100 times yes. We just saw genoprotective, cytoprotective, immune system protective. There are tons of things that you can do. So that's available for you. I've tried to keep it really affordable because I know mold also wrecks your world, I have a mold literacy training course for doctors. So if you're a practitioner and you want to learn this approach, if it really resonated with you, that's out there. It's called Are You Missing Mold Illness? And then also I have a lot of free stuff out there. I talk through the very whole first part of my book in a video on YouTube called Mold Facts You Need to Know, or 16 Mold Facts. You can find it in different ways because I really want people to understand the dangers of mold. And so it makes your job easier because you can say, I think it's mold. Go watch this video. She'll tell you why. She'll tell you what's up. And then we'll talk about treatment. So I want to save you time in practice. So thank you so much for allowing me to share my naturopathic approach. And I'll take any questions.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jill, so much. That was amazing.
I bet. Oh, should I stop sharing? Yeah.
It's up to you.
Sure.
I kind of want. I own your English version book, but now seeing the cover of the Polish version, I kind of want the Polish version. of your book too.
Isn't it cute?
That cover is amazing.
I know, it makes it look so friendly.
I know, it's the nicest mold I've ever seen.
I know. I was kind of, I mean, I had no control over that. That was that once you release those rights. And when it came back, I thought, oh my gosh, did they read the book?
It should have like big like teeth.
I know.
Like,
yeah. Right. Yeah.
Okay. First question here. What if a patient doesn't have a gallbladder?
Doesn't matter, thankfully. What do? You do some things a little bit differently if they don't have a gallbladder. So we make our bile in our liver. So as long as they have a liver, they can make bile. But one problem if you don't have a gallbladder is that bile drips all the time. And you may not have enough bile when you eat to fully absorb the fats in your food. So what I do with patients who are missing a gallbladder is have them eat frequent small meals. So these are not the people that are going to be able to do intermittent fasting while they're doing their mold treatment, and maybe not at all, because that can be kind of hard on the gut to have that drip going all the time. And then we do frequent small dosing of the insoluble fiber. So some of my patients, I say, get up to 2 tablespoons of insoluble fiber every day. And then we might add other things like carbonized bamboo, like Takasumi Supreme, when we're going to poke the bear, go on the antifungals. But if they don't have a gallbladder, then I have them spread that insoluble fiber out throughout the whole day. So we're picking up bile all day.
Great answer. I have seen dozens of people talk about mold, and you're one of the few that actually like stresses the relationship between mycotoxins and bile. And that's one of the things I really appreciate by your talks.
Thank you. Yeah. It's because as you know, after working with lots of different mycotoxin type testing, someone can start with 1 mycotoxin and then 3 months later, they have 4 that weren't even there on the first test. And so this idea of like, we're going to give the specific binder, I think that's a great concept. But as I've learned, I used to test every 4 weeks, which things just, all the time. And it's like some characters show up that weren't there before. And so I sat back and I thought, I'm making myself crazy. I'm making my patients crazy, like, okay, now take this one. Okay, now take this one. And then I realized, no, we're binding bile, really, if you think of it. So let's focus on what binds bile.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great, just from my own personal, I've seen thousands of mycotoxin results, and I've seen lots of practitioners like yourself that test every couple of weeks or once a week. And I've kind of have dug into it of there's a lot of there's a lot of fluctuation that you're seeing there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see a lot, some of it can be talked about by the hydrophobicity of the mycotoxins themselves. I'd say that in a majority of the time, you don't see the trichos in a lot of the patients over the first 3 months or so.
Right.
And then after 3 months of treatment, you start seeing trichos come out, which are the most hydrophobic of all the mycotoxins. So I describe it to my patients. It's like sedimentary layers. We just kind of scrape the one layer off and then we scrape the next layer off. Yeah, exactly. And I used peeling the onion analogy myself.
Yeah, right.
This isn't one of the questions that was asked, but my kind of I know that a lot of patients, especially women, and they're either menopause or perimenopause, take hormone, and that can have major effects on bile acid production in the gallbladder. Do you have any have you dealt with those type of issues?
And sometimes, a lot of times when they're on hormones, they need to be for bone health and cardiovascular health and all that kind of stuff. So we try to keep them in that low normal range, but not overkill. And I've seen a lot of overprescribing of bioidentical hormones. So I try to keep them, try to just keep them in that low normal range during treatment. And then if they felt better on the higher things, then, they can go back to that once we get, but progesterone can really slow things down.
Oh yeah.
Slow down that hydrochloric acid production. And And then you don't get the, that stimulates peristalsis and all the digestive juices. And so, yeah, it's a tricky spot to be in. But if they're not sleeping because they don't have enough progesterone, then they're not healing. So that's that prioritization of like, okay, what's the more important thing for this patient at the moment?
Yeah, and it's just like, I mean, when I tell a lot of patients, a lot of practitioners, when I'm teaching them about how to keep mold, it's like, there's not like, it's more of like choose your own adventure than like following like a map.
Yeah.
There's not one direct path here. You like are going down one path and then you have to like zig somewhere else. So
yeah, and it's completely dependent on the patient in front of you and not, I mean, people will say, well, you only use herbs. And I'm like, no, I don't. But I try to start there. And if we need to use pharmaceuticals, we do. If we need to use pharmaceutical bile acids, we do that, like Actigol and, Tudka and things like that. So we're going to use whatever we need for the patient in front of me.
Exactly. I have one thing for one of your slides. When I was doing postdoc work, we were looking at green tea as an activator of NTFR or no, NRF2.
Oh, NRF2.
Yes.
Oh,
so,
I wonder if that's why
there's a lot of phenol chemicals. There's probably about between 8 and 12 different ones in green tea. I mean, obviously it depends on where you're getting the green tea from. That's one of the
right. You want to get organic. Yeah.
Organic, but then like even for like one part of the country could give you like if you're like getting it from like one side of China, you can have certain elements being a lot higher than the other part. So, I mean, that's one of the like big problems that you see in research done in green tea is that not all green teas are equivalent. So
that's so interesting because I know that even personally, I have some green tea that I just like, I don't think that did anything for me, and I was always looking at the organic versus non-organic, but now that makes a lot of sense because wherever they would have stopped the steam drying, that point is probably what determines the polyphenol count.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different, it's like where it's growing at, what the minerals are in the soil that they're growing it in. What we had done is that we actually like purified out like 2,000 different chemicals and then did DNA test to like see like which cells were like activating NRF2 from which chemicals. So we were able to actually like say like these particular chemicals were identified like activating NRF2 so that we didn't have to like, we took all the ambiguity out of it.
Right, so. Right. Wow, that's cool. What fun research.
Yeah. And that's one of the good things about it. I had a quick, I mean, so you kind of like bounced on it before. You said you were kind of like looking at, you're doing like a small pilot study of trying to like figure out what the best collection method is.
We've talked a lot about this.
I know, I wish I could, it's on my like top 5 list of like things that like, if I'm like testing mycotoxins again, that's one of the top 5 things I want to get back to. So what's the latest on that? I mean, scratch my research itch a little bit here.
Oh, I wish I had a good takeaway. I do think that I know when you and I were talking, it was the what do we use to provoke question.
Yeah.
I think we need to first ask if we provoke everybody with the same thing and then retest them at 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hour, 5 hour, 6 hour, 7 hour, 8 hour. What is the peak and the trough for the average person? And is there? Because I think that the timing is almost more important than what you use. So maybe what I'd love is to have precision of glutathione. If you use that for a challenge, test at 4 hours. If you use a sauna, test that at 2 hours. If you use a blah, blah, test it at, so that we can, not only is it doesn't become a which is the best way to provoke, it's which is the best way to use each provoking type thing, because we do have some patients who can't excrete and they need that help. Yeah. But I would say I'm at about, sauna is about a 4 hour peak, I think.
Okay. That's good to know.
That's the only thing I know for sure. Glutathione seems to be a complete mess.
but it's for some patients it is necessary to get some mycotoxins out.
But it's also under reporting some mycotoxins.
That's true.
So it's that mixed picture. And then I'm like, well, did we really yield anything?
Yeah, and I think you're completely right to say like sometimes you just need to like, I mean, I've in consults with practitioners that say like all the indicators here look at mold toxicity. Let's try that, and in 3 months let's reevaluate, and then we retest in 3 months and we got tons of mycotoxins coming out. So
yeah. So what I'm doing, what my side project, I'm working on a book right now, but once that is done,
you're working on books? I'm shocked.
Yeah. Yeah. Once that's done, I'm hiring an app developer for the data collection for my little study I'm doing on scientifically validating my questionnaire against various mycotoxin testing or mold testing, like SIRS labs or whatever.
Yep.
And part of what we're going to collect there is, did you provoke? If so, what did you use? When did you use it in relation to when you took your sample? So that we can actually try to data dive that.
Awesome. That sounds great.
Yeah. So my goal is to get that built out. If anyone's listening, you're an app developer, call me. And then, and then publish, so that we can really, so we have better information.
Cool. One last thing. So you talked a little bit. So I work for a mold remediation company. Surprise, surprise. You kind of like talked about you in your talk about like you're like looking at like one side of the coin, but in order to get the patient healthy, you have to like look on the other side of the coin. What's some of the things that you like work with the mold remediators in your area to help your patients?
That's a good question. We do, there's a sort of weird trend that's going on with remediation that I've only seen happen in the last 5 years, where it used to be when you set up negative containment. So they set up all the plastic, to make sure you've sealed off the area and you're not going to cross contaminate, and then create negative air pressure by running a big fan. And when I first started this, however many years ago, they would always do negative air outdoor. So it would always, the long flex tube would go to a place outdoors so that the fan was blowing it outdoors. Some of the remediation companies in our area now are doing the negative air and running it through an air scrubber and then pushing it out to the room air on the other side. First of all, it's not an understanding how negative air pressure works, but also it's not an understanding of mycotoxins.
Yeah.
So those air scrubbers do not clean mycotoxins.
No.
So they're just, maybe it is catching spores and spore fragments, but it's not catching the mycotoxins. So you're now ticking off the mold, which means it's going to kick up its production of mycotoxins and now pushing it out into the room air so that the thyme can be used as an essential oil. I've been working with our remediators in our area and our families to pre-treat the area with thyme essential oil. So it shuts down that protective mycotoxin mechanism of the mold. So we can do, if you use a spray, you could be adding more water to the problem. So we'll treat cotton balls with thyme essential oil and just place them all over in the room. And then when they do the containment, the thyme is trapped in there. And a lot of the remediators are like, it smells so good in my mask. I have less breathing problems. I have less, so they actually like it as well. So that's one of the things that we're doing. And I don't yell at them. I say, prepare, let's make sure everybody's on board, that the remediation company understands that negative air, the stuff that they're blowing out, has to go outside.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, I think that's true, but I think it's one thing that I think that separates us from a lot of the other like remediation companies. We're one of the few ones that actually like addresses mycotoxins themselves. And the way that we like get rid of them is that we use we purify enzymes from bacteria, and then we degrade the mycotoxins with that bacterial mix.
Neat. So, and is that an end step? So they do the removal and
it's the last thing that we do, and we usually allow the mixture we fog the home with that mixture for about 24 hours, and pretty much degrades. I mean, we've tested it multiple times, and it pretty much eliminates all the mycotoxins in the home.
Nice.
So,
Because
but
that's such a big deal, that people won't feel good and they'll say, well, the remediation didn't work. And it's like, well, because they didn't really remediate the whole
yeah,
part.
yeah, and sometimes it makes it worse. Like they will like
Mm,
pull stuff out of the basement, and they'll carry it through the home, and now you have mycotoxins in other parts
yeah.
of the home as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'd say at least like 10% of our business is us redoing things that other mold remediation companies have done. Like they come through, everything looks nice, but then
Right.
when we like test for mycotoxins in the home, uh, like off the charts. It's
Yeah.
like I'm sorry, they pulled the mold out, and it looked, but
Mhm.
they didn't pull out any mycotoxins.
Yeah, no, and there aren't very many remediators who even understand that,
No.
there are a few, only a few. Right. Thank you for being that.
That's what we all do, what we can do. I want to thank you for coming and sharing with us, and
Yeah.
in writing your book and doing your
Thank
classes.
you.
I know you do so much for the community, and I mean, I'm just really happy that we have people like you that can
Thank you.
really just like push things forward.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a few of us, but we're mighty. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you everybody for listening to our webinar, and make sure to like check back for other webinars in the future. Take care.
Bye.